thanks, folks, for stopping by and listening here. As Rich said, this is definitely an exciting new space, a space that I started covering a few months back, have done some research and have a report out for Forrester. And the space is growing very, very quickly. So not only is it growing from the number of vendors, but it's growing in the number of requests that I get on a daily basis for folks trying to solve this problem. And so the excitement on all sides is very large. So with that, let's talk about the challenges that enterprises are seeing when it comes to enterprise mobility. So today we've got the existing systems that drive our enterprises, the line of business systems, the databases, directory services, content management services, things of this, the transactional and content systems that drive our enterprises, drive our brands to do what we do today. On top of that, the technologies that bind these systems together, things like SOAP, XML RPC, things that have been the stalwarts of our SOA infrastructures, along with SQL and MQ to drive our transactional systems, and then some of our newer systems that use REST. These are all protocols that bind these systems together and are very familiar to a lot of us. On the other hand, we have these new mobile channels that come in, all the tablets, phones, etc. And the communication protocols that they are familiar with and they're used to dealing with are things like JSON and REST and OAuth for authentication. And what you see here is there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect between the protocols that the mobile channels are used to dealing with and that which our systems of record provide. And so the challenge here for enterprises and enterprises that want to provide a mobility front end to their existing systems is this gray area in the middle, or I guess in this deck it's the blue area in the middle, which you can refer to as a simplification layer or a translation transformation layer. How do we take all the information that's provided by these protocols at the bottom and simplify them for the channels at the top, such that we can create an engaging experience on top of these systems for B2C. We can create an experience for our B2E users that allow them to be more performant, more efficient, and allow them to do their jobs that much better. So the second challenge is in mobile development itself. And at Forrester, we're seeing a lot of changes, but a lot of things that actually aren't changing nearly fast enough. So the first big change is the enterprise development cycles. So we're used to seeing, in the past we were very used to seeing enterprise software take 12 to 18 months to deliver. Very waterfall driven, where we had very discrete areas for requirements, for design, development, test, maintenance, and all these had their cadence. They all came in the same order. Now with mobile and the consumerization that has come with mobile, folks are expecting a much shorter cycle. Things like 6 to 8 months for a lot of the apps that come out of enterprises, because in all honesty, every time I turn my phone on, every day when I look at my phone, I have 3, 4, sometimes double-digit updates from the apps that are on the device, and a lot of these come from the consumer-driven apps that I have, but it's that mentality that's now starting to pervade in the enterprise that says, well, if my Angry Birds updates every 3 days, why doesn't the front end of my CRM system update every 3 days so I can actually have new functionality or better performing functionality or a better experience with the apps that I use in my enterprise? So we're seeing that start to erode that 12 to 18 month cycle into a 6 to 8 month cycle. Now on the flip side of that, enterprise spend is not increasing to match these mobile demands. And so we're seeing a lot of demands for a lot of new apps and a lot of new mobility attached to existing applications. But as of right now, we at Forrester are not seeing these budgets match this demand. So essentially enterprises are being asked to do a lot more with the same or less, depending on where resources are being stretched. So therefore, given that we're being asked to do a lot more with a lot less, the cadence in which a lot of these development systems need to work need to be compressed. So the requirements on the individuals that are providing the apps and providing the enterprise mobility on top of these back-end systems are very varied and very disparate. So not only, most of the time when I talk to folks about mobility, they think about the devices, they think about the individual views and the experience that's generated on the device itself. But in enterprise, we also have to think about the back end, and we also have to think about how do we actually get that data to the device such that the device and the developers on these devices can make use of it and create a great experience out of it. Because without that, we're simply playing a one-sided game that in most cases doesn't really solve a business challenge. So the requirements on these folks are to do front ends, to do back ends, and then do it in a performant and scalable way that can handle the demands of mobile. Because in a lot of cases, simply by putting a mobile front end on our systems, now these systems are going to start to be taxed a lot more than they used to, because instead of having a single user with a single desktop or a single laptop, now a given user, your sales folks or your field force folks, they might have a phone in their pocket, a tablet that they carry around, and all these will be on and connected to your enterprise while they sit down at their desktop. So instead of a 1x order of magnitude performance and scalability implication on your back end, now we're talking 3, 4, and sometimes 5x on that. And so to handle that, and to kind of put the top 3 points together, requirements, design, development, and test teams all need to work on the same cadence. And so at Forrester, we're seeing a lot of enterprises start to disassemble or break down a lot of these waterfall models and a lot of the organizational models that fell along with that. And so test teams aren't in a silo by themselves anymore. Now test teams are interspersed around the development teams themselves. The same thing with design. Development teams will have a designer in with them, a tester in with them, maybe even daily interactions with a business analyst, such that everything works in lockstep and everything has a very distinct cadence to do more with less, to get these enterprise apps out in 6 to 8 months. So what are our options when we do this mobile development? From a development technology standpoint, how do we get these apps out there? Well, the first is organic development. And so a lot of folks, when they come to me and they say, we have a business challenge around mobility, we are going to develop an app. And without thinking about any outside vendor work or sourcing strategies or anything like that, a lot of folks immediately say, we can do this in-house. We have resources to handle this. And so they take a look at just developing it all in-house, using the technologies on the platforms themselves, and doing that integration work themselves. The other option is to do it with our existing middleware solutions. So these are solutions that sit generally on-prem in your enterprise. They provide a single point of interaction and then a secure channel to the devices themselves in which to provide a mobility solution. And then in the middle are our cloud services, things in the past that were comprised of infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and now this new exciting space that's come in, back end as a service. So let's take a look in a little bit more detail into each of these and the pros and cons of each. So we'll start at the top of that triangle, the middleware section. So what are the good things that middleware provides? The biggest benefit that we've seen is a single point of integration. So on that initial slide where we showed our 3 layers in the 3 layers of enterprise mobility, the middleware server will sit within your enterprise and provide that integration between these systems that speak a bunch of different disparate protocols, a bunch of different languages, if you will. So these servers will take and interact with things that speak SOAP and speak XML RPC, that might speak REST, introspect and talk to these services and say, what are your data touch points? How do I talk to you? How do I get your data such that I can present that to my mobile clients? They generally have a write once, run anywhere mechanism, either through open source things such as PhoneGap, or through proprietary technologies, using languages that are unique to them, or sometimes languages such as Lua or even JavaScript. And in most cases, there's a development environment provided, a development environment that is, once again, proprietary to these middleware frameworks and middleware systems, but this development environment is provided in case your development teams don't already have anything. Now, on the other hand, the cons of these middleware solutions. The top one is vendor lock-in, and this is the one that we hear about nearly every day, especially when folks are taking a look at the advantages and disadvantages of using a system like this compared to one of the as-a-service options. So what does vendor lock-in really mean, and is it a bad thing, and if so, why? So for me, vendor lock-in is two parts. First, a lot of the middleware vendors will have a contractual obligation that says, if you use our system and develop apps on our system, these apps need to continue to be owned and contained within this system for the lifetime of that app. So that's the first piece of vendor lock-in. The second piece is just the technology side, and the idea of, well, if I put a system in my enterprise that is the central point of integration, and therefore that's the one system or the one cluster of systems that all my mobile apps talk to. If I take that out, that piece of integration that it does, I'm going to have to recreate that. And so that kind of technology vendor lock-in is there as well. So that's kind of the two parts of vendor lock-in that exist that I consider a con of the middleware platforms. Second, the write once, run anywhere. I said earlier, sometimes it uses languages such as JavaScript that might be well known, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes some of these vendors use languages such as Lua or even more proprietary languages. So it's good to know what language you actually write in, because there might be a learning curve involved with that language as well. So even though you don't have to learn Java for Android and Objective-C for iOS and .NET for Windows and things like that, or HTML and CSS and JavaScript for an open web standard, you still might have to learn a proprietary language, and so keep that in mind when taking a look at these. Next, there are obviously maintenance requirements on the middleware server itself. So as with any server that you put in your data center, there is the cost of running it, the cost of keeping it up to date, maintenance updates on the OS that it runs on, maintenance updates on the platform itself, and so these are things to consider. And finally, they generally have a pretty static cost model. It's either a price per app, a price per unique users of those apps, but that price is pretty static and doesn't vary as per the success or as per the overall usage of the apps that are on the platforms themselves. So on the other hand, the other side of the triangle, if we do purely organic development and write this ourselves and do it in-house, how does that work, and what are the pros and cons there? So first, you get a truly fully customized experience. So instead of an experience that I've written once and it works across all platforms, but has a similar look and feel and a similar experience across all platforms, now with purely custom development, I can write an app for Android that looks exactly like I believe it should on Android and fit in with a lot of the usage experiences that Android users have, and the same thing for iOS, because as we've seen in Forrester, a lot of folks will actually get upset if my iOS device runs an app that looks like it should be on an Android device and vice versa. The fanboys or the religious zealots of the platform wars can get a bit upset if their apps don't look exactly like they think they should and have interaction patterns like they think they should. Next, you can take full advantage of the device capabilities. So my devices that have GPS, have accelerometers, have NFC chips, have new add-ons that are coming out all the time. As soon as these are available, I can take full advantage of this simply because I'm doing native development and talking directly to the OS level through SDKs provided by the platform manufacturers themselves, such that I can have a truly unique experience taking advantage of everything on the device. And finally, I can use tools that are familiar and comfortable to myself and my development teams. And so we'd said with the middleware providers that they provide a development experience or provide a set of development tools. With the organic development path, I can use Eclipse if I'm familiar with that. If I'm familiar with Microsoft Visual Studio and those tools, I can use those. I can use Xcode if I want to do my iOS development in that platform. And so things that I know, environments that I know, experiences that I know, I can continue to use these and continue to be performant based on these. Now there are cons to this as well. You know, with all this power comes some pretty great responsibilities as well. And the biggest one is this first one. The development owns both the front-end experience and that back-end integration. And so once again, a lot of folks, when they talk about mobile, they only think about the devices and the experience on the device. But if you're going to do it all in-house, now you own the back-end integration piece as well. And so bringing all these systems together with disparate protocols, pulling them together, transforming that into a language or a set of protocols that my mobile devices use, this is work. Now, you know, we can start to get efficiencies out of this by the more apps we do, the more we can start to create internal common platforms, but the fact still remains that there is work to do. And this development team owns all third-party integration. So if I want to bring in things like Twilio, or I want to bring in things like interacting with mail servers or social graph from Twitter or Facebook or things like that, I have to do all that myself, or my development teams have to do all that themselves. And so it's, you know, new SDKs, and while these services are becoming more and more consumable, there's a term that we're starting to hear a lot within Forrester called SDK fatigue, where development teams are literally having SDKs, software development kit, thrown at them, and they're having to learn these quickly, week by week by week. You know, new system to integrate it with, new SDK to learn, another new system, another new SDK. And while there are similar patterns between these, individual service providers don't all get together and say, you know, let's all make our CRUD operations, our create, read, update, and delete operations all semantically the same. Instead, they're just slightly different, and so keeping track of all these can be a challenge. And so that third-party integration tends to be a bit tough. So now let's talk about the middle of that triangle, the cloud services, and kind of the sweet spot right now. So I'd mentioned infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, and these are definitely viable options, especially for folks that have gone down that path and are familiar with that and might have existing investment in that. But what they don't provide is in a lot of cases, they don't provide anything that's helpful for our mobile users and helpful for our developers that are doing mobile development. And that's where backend as a service comes in and is a great help for this. And across all the research I did in the backend as a service space, the one overriding theme that I got day in and day out was the backend as a service is here to make developers' lives easier. And by proxy, I hear that and think, given my enterprise background, I hear it's here to make development organizations' lives easier. And so that cadence that we talked about earlier, the cadence where our BAs had to be in lockstep with our designers and our developers and our testers, backend as a service provides a framework to allow all this to happen in a very simplified and easy way. So if we take it from the bottom left and see what it offers, first we can get context-driven mobile features, and so we can take full advantage of our devices and of our platforms, because backend as a service basically provides us with an infrastructure to talk to data, to communicate with data systems, whether they be in the cloud, on-prem somewhere, but it gives us a consistent development experience to talk to these systems. And therefore, once I get the data, I can make use of that data to the best advantage of the devices themselves and get a truly context-driven mobile experience. Most of these backend as a service providers provide native push notifications, and so whether that be simply front-ending a service like Urban Airship or front-ending the native Google, Apple, and Windows native push notifications, most will integrate that into their SDK such that this SDK fatigue that I talked about earlier is now obviated, because I'm only dealing with the backend as a service provider's SDK that brings all this in together. They provide cloud-based storage and processing. So any new data that I create, I generally don't have to establish my database somewhere, whether it be SQL or NoSQL, establish a schema for SQL databases, or establish a performance sharding mechanism for my NoSQL databases. But instead, I can rely on my service provider, my backend as a service provider, to do this for me, and they simply provide me a dynamic RESTful API in which I can call, make calls to create new objects, make calls to read and update those objects, and then delete those objects if I want, without ever worrying about how those objects are stored and maintained in the back end. I also get the processing power along with that we're used to in these cloud models. In a lot of cases, we're given a dynamic RESTful API on top of both those data systems as well as a set of services that the backend as a service folks provide as well. And so we talked about a consistent CRUD API on top of the data that exists in the cloud storage, but also integrate in with that things like Facebook and Twitter, integrate their APIs into the backend of the service APIs, such that once again I minimize and nearly obviate the SDK fatigue of having to learn all these new SDKs. We can do data store modeling, and so this is what I referred to earlier, which is I can make API requests, standard RESTful API requests, and this actually creates my objects in the data store. And once I have objects in the data store, a dynamic RESTful API is built on top of these objects for me as a developer, such that I don't have to worry about always maintaining, creating, and updating my API for both my developers and for other developers to use. Most provide a set of user management and analytics platforms, and so these tend to be more lightweight than a full-fledged, full featured analytics platform and user management platform. But with mobile, one of the trends that we see is we don't need heavyweight processes, and we don't need heavyweight feature function, because great mobile applications are there to provide a great experience, provide exactly what I need, when I need it, in the context that I should be consuming it. And so, therefore, I don't want a full heavyweight analytics system that's going to require my app to always be running or require constant user feedback or user input, but instead be there when my app runs, allow it to go away, allow everything to run naturally. And that's from the user's experience of it. Now, from a developer's experience, these analytics systems need to be extremely easy to use as well, such that I shouldn't have to code around the analytics platform that's being provided to me, such that I can get the value out of it. Once again, a lot of the cons that we heard earlier were things that that made developers have to learn more languages, learn more SDKs, learn more features, and analytics shouldn't be one of those. And so what we're seeing here in the backend as a service space is the analytics platforms that are provided for developers are once again baked into the SDK, baked into the platform, such that they're naturally there and naturally able to be used. Similar thing for user management. If I want to have user management in the cloud and manage users for my mobile, separate from those users that I manage through my existing directory services, things like Active Directory or ODAP or LDAP systems, these backend service providers do that. And we'll talk more about that once we get to the enterprise usages of this. There are flexible pricing models, and this just goes hand in hand with what we've seen in the cloud space. So instead of the static pricing models that we heard of earlier, which is done by user or by app, most backend as a service providers now are offering usage models that say, let's charge per API used or per user in a graduated model that these users may come and go, and so don't charge me every month looking forward for users that used it one time this month. And so these flexible pricing models allow folks to use backend as a service as a way to get apps prototyped, up and running very quickly, and have their internal users use them, or maybe have friends use them, to see if they work and not really be charged egregiously, just to see if something's going to work. And this is what allows true innovation. Allow our creatives, allow our really innovative folks to dream and to create apps, and to do that in a way that's not harmful for our enterprises and cost detrimental for our enterprises when that innovation activity is happening. And finally, no vendor lock-in. So we talked about what was vendor lock-in earlier, and it was two-phase. It was contractual lock-in by the provider, and then technology lock-in. Well, I'm extremely happy to say that there is not a single back-end service provider that I talk to, and understand I've not talked to them all because there's more and more providers getting into the space every day. But of all the ones I've talked to, not a single one had any type of contractual lock-in for your apps on their platform. Instead, most actually give you a way to export your data if you want to leave their platform. And so I can go to the system, and as simple as it was for me to spin up an instance or spin up an area, a tenant space, if you will, in their system, it's that easy to spin back down and take that data that I stored with me. And that's the data portability point that I point out here is the data that I've created using this system is actually mine. It shouldn't be owned by the platform itself. And so most vendors allow me to take that with me. So how does this work in the enterprise? How does mobile backend as a service work in the enterprise? We talked about a lot of the kind of common features across the backend as a service providers that are out there today, but these features tend to work well for the long tail apps or the consumer driven apps. How can this work in the enterprise, and can it work? And if so, how are folks making use of it? So this is that middle simplification layer that we saw earlier. And so if I were to solve this, if I as a technology guy were to solve this, and I didn't have something like mobile backend as a service at my disposal, I would probably look at something like using Node.js or Rails or PHP or any of these backend platforms that are starting to become popular as a way for me to do my integration and transformation layer. So for instance, in Node, I can have an asynchronous way to do my integration between a service that might use SOAP and one that uses XML RPC, and translate that into a JSON package that gets sent to my clients. And then I would front end that with something like Nginx or reverse proxy like Nginx, or a content delivery network, a CDN, Akamai and others, or use an application delivery controller that new software models are coming out to kind of package CDNs and transformation languages up into these application development or delivery controllers. But once again, I as an analyst can stand here and talk about it for 5 or 10 minutes, and that all sounds well and good. But if you go back to your development teams and present this to them and say, hey, we need this in 6 to 8 months, along with all the other development that we need for our mobile applications, and oh, by the way, you're not getting any additional resource to do it because our development spend isn't increasing this year for mobile initiatives. Your development teams are going to start to glaze over a little bit, because that's quite a daunting challenge. And so that's where back-end as a service comes in and acts as that simplification layer. It acts as that integration layer that understands back-ends, understands how to integrate these back-ends together and translate that into simplified protocols and simplified languages that the mobile front ends can consume. And now I talk about this, and in my report I mentioned as well, is there's a strong divide between the back end of the service players that know the enterprise and can work with enterprise, and those that don't. And there are valid business cases and valid use cases for each, and that's why the market has as many vendors in it as they do. But on this slide, I'm going to talk about the ones that are definitely geared towards the enterprise and solving enterprise problems. So if we see what that simplification layer, how that works with the mobile backend as a service, we get the picture that we have above, which looks very similar to the one we had on the last slide, where I still support all my devices. I still have user management and analytics and metrics in the cloud. I still have cloud data storage. I can still talk to third-party cloud services, Facebook, Twitter, Salesforce.com, and others that provide open APIs that I can integrate with, essentially have cloud-to-cloud communications, and then not only have to learn all these protocols, but through this cloud-to-cloud communication, a lot of these protocols get wrapped up for me, such that I only use my back-end of the service vendor's API to interact with those. But the key is the middle section. The key is a lot of these enterprise mobile back-end as a service, they can work with existing line of business systems. They can provide that integration layer. They can provide this simplification layer that we see at the bottom, and take all these protocols and take things like, how do I communicate with SAP, and how do I communicate with ERP systems, and communicate with my backend database. They can, the backend of the service players that are targeted at the enterprise can do all this and provide value add on top of a lot of those commodities that we talked about earlier. And so by doing this, now my enterprise developers don't have to worry about how do I engineer a solution with Nginx and plus a CDN sitting on top of Node or Rails and PHP, and learning all these languages and providing an enterprise class solution on top of them, all within a compressed time cycle. Now I can simply go out to my back end of the service provider, turn on these options in that service provider, start writing front end code, and I'll be honest, I'm not here to say it's completely magic. There will still be a little bit of back end integration code because these back end systems are very unique to your enterprise as opposed to every other enterprise, and so you will have to write a little bit of code, sometimes in Java, sometimes in JavaScript, but nearly always in languages that are very understood for today's developers. But those little snippets of integration code are a lot easier to write and a lot easier to maintain than trying to integrate and maintain both those snippets plus the platform that they run on. And so that's kind of the magic or the secret sauce that the enterprise backend of the service providers provide is that framework, is that base building blocks in which I can then allow my enterprise developers to focus purely on the experience, purely on the mobile devices and allow them to do what they do best, which is enable these back-end systems for my mobile users, whether they be my clients, my employees, my platform partners, or the developers on my platform partners that are now developing new apps that we may have never seen otherwise, and I might not even know they're doing. But the backend as a platform or backend as a service platform allows me to do that and have true brand growth in spaces that I might not have seen before. So with that, I'll pause and transfer back to Rich, in which he can kind of give a quick update and overview as to what his platform provides.
Okay, great. Thank you, Michael. Hopefully everyone can see my presentation I've switched over to. I think Michael gave a fantastic overview of, in general, where a mobile backend as a service adds value, and specifically, why it's important to enterprises. And I wanted to recap a few of those things, and then talk a little bit about AnyPresence, which is an example, and then hand it over back to Michael. So if we were to do a quick recap on the characteristics of an enterprise class mobile backend as a service, typically if you're building an application either consumer facing or employee facing, but within an enterprise, you're going to have to connect to backend systems. These could be existing applications, these could be databases, but the data typically resides in a system that you may already have in place. The second thing you're going to need to do is, just like from a data perspective, if you need to authenticate users, those users may have to authenticate against systems that exist in the enterprise today, directory services, single sign-on, various other solutions, or you may want to provide a unique, standalone authentication mechanism for the context of that mobile app. So having the flexibility to provide either some native out-of-the-box authentication capabilities or connect to third-party authentication systems is important. The ability to leverage reusable mobile services, things like SMS, push notifications, email notifications, social connectors, etc. There's a whole host of very interesting services that power a lot of the most interesting features of mobile applications today. And so providing access to those features to enterprise developers so they don't have to build and maintain it and kind of reinvent the wheel on their own is certainly a critical piece of this. Once you've defined and built your backend, the development effort certainly doesn't stop there, right? There's a lot of front-end work to do. So to the extent that this solution helps reduce the development and testing effort on the front end of the development as well, is a key factor or characteristic of an enterprise class mobile backend. And finally, as important is the ability to give your developers full control over all of the runtime components of the solution. So, we'll talk about lock-in in a little bit more detail. In the context of the enterprise, it's a bit of a false platitude to say to the enterprise guy, hey, you own your data, don't worry about it, because in point of fact, in an enterprise scenario, your data is going to be coming from an existing system. So it's redundant to tell an enterprise customer that you own your data. But it's important that not only do you have control over your data, but you have complete control over the source code of the application and the server itself without any dependencies on that vendor, should you choose to go in a different direction or terminate the relationship. And finally, the ability to be able to deploy this backend as a service and corresponding features, not only in the cloud if you want something with a quick turnaround, but also to give you the option to take those runtime components and deploy it behind the firewall or in your own data center, as the case may be. And you may want to do this on an app-by-app basis, so you have a hybrid of some apps deployed in the cloud and some apps deployed on-premise behind your firewall. So, just to summarize, these are the key characteristics of an enterprise class mobile backend as a service. So if we step back a little bit and look at what it takes to really build a mobile app, at the end of the day, there's really two areas, right? There's backend services, and again, to reiterate, some of the most interesting features of mobile apps today like the ability to share data across users, connect to source systems, do things like push notifications proactively, or send, have interactive SMS messaging to complement the app. All of those features are ultimately powered by something in the back end and not necessarily front end code. So what you need there is, centralized connectivity and centralized mobile services that you can reuse across apps. And to Michael's point earlier, any application-specific business logic, transformations, and things like that, you don't want to have to push that down to the source systems, nor do you want to really put a whole lot of that on the front-end code. You want to encapsulate that app-specific business logic in the middle tier so that you can more easily maintain it, have to push updates to the user less frequently, and also not have to muck around with your source systems. On the front end, we're seeing, Apple certainly set the bar with the iPhone, but mobile application user interfaces now are becoming incredibly intricate and complex. There's a significant focus on, unique user experiences. They're heavily branded applications, and differentiation, especially for consumer-facing applications, is very critical. And one of the elephants in the room from using traditional full-stack mobile platforms is, although they give you this, write once, deploy everywhere marketing spiel, you typically run into, at some point, limitations to what you can do in that user interface. And it's very difficult, if not impossible, to take that code and give it to a front-end developer to modify it, because there's potentially virtual machines or interpretation layers on the front end of that code. So, providing complete flexibility on the front-end side is really critical to, high-end user experiences and branding. So, AnyPresence, the solution that we've built out, is essentially a platform as a service that helps you reduce the time and cost of building these enterprise-class apps with what we call a guaranteed no-platform lock-in. And by that, we don't mean just you own your data, which you already do, but you have complete IP ownership of both the application code as well as the server, the backend as a service. So on the backend server side, we provide you with, like other mobile backend services, authentication and user management, both native, but also the ability to connect to third party, connectivity with your enterprise systems, and the ability to write as sophisticated as you like business logic in that middle tier. And a whole host of mobile services like SMS, IVR integration, push notification, and other services that you can install on an optional basis on a per app, based on per app requirements. On the front end, what we do is we generate cross-platform software developer kits. As Michael said, there's a lot of SDK fatigue because app developers have to learn the SDKs or interfaces of different source systems. We normalize it into a single layer and encapsulate all of that, all of the integration from multiple systems into one. So you can build a composite mobile app and have your developers only need to learn, a single set or a consistent set of APIs to leverage all of the mobile services and connect to your source systems. The other thing we do with AnyPresence is we also give you a prototyping tool so that you can very easily assemble a simple app to test the end-to-end functionality of your SDK. We'll generate that across iOS, Android, pure native, not hybrid, pure native iOS and Android apps, and HTML5 apps, which you can take and put in a hybrid wrapper if you want. But we don't put anything proprietary in that code. So you can hand it over to a front-end developer, and they can open it up in Xcode or their favorite HTML5 and JavaScript editor of choice, and further customize that user interface to their heart's content without any platform constraints. So what enables us to do this is we followed very good architectural principles that have strict separation between our designer, which is what you see in the blue here. So we provide you with a web-based designer that you log into and define your application, the databases or apps you're connecting to, define your objects and business logic, select additional mobile services you want to enable, and also allow you to assemble rapid user interface prototypes. And then we publish or generate a unique backend as a service server for that particular app. And by default, we can host it in our cloud infrastructure, which is based on Heroku and Amazon. Or you can take that code and provision it in your own data center or behind your firewall. We also generate the SDKs and the app prototypes across HTML5 native iOS and native Android. And everything on the right-hand side in this green, we actually view this as the IP that ultimately you want to own and maintain and manage. So you can continue to use the AnyPresence Designer, certainly, and all the productivity therein to maintain and manage those components. And we have a whole host of features to help you do that in a very productive manner. So for example, we can instantly generate and host HTML5 apps for you in the cloud. We actually do native compilation in the cloud for the iOS and Android prototypes. We provide you with test and production environments so you can follow good methodologies from an enterprise perspective of testing and rolling out apps. But at the end of the day, your developers have complete control over that back-end service as well as the mobile apps. You can choose to, if you at any point in time want to sever the relationship with the AnyPresence Designer and take and maintain and manage those runtime components completely on your own. So when we say no platform lock-in, we truly mean it. You don't just own your data, you own your app and you own the server, and you can completely manage and maintain those components on your own without any vendor dependency. So to summarize, what we ultimately do is give our customers the best of both worlds. You have a development platform and a mobile backend as a service that helps reduce your total cost of ownership in different areas, helps you leverage reusable mobile services and connectivity to your systems, and provides you with a way to accelerate the user interface development time with SDK, cross-platform SDKs and interface prototypes. But we also allow you to retain all of the advantages that you get that Michael talked about with the organic or custom development that you may be used to. So completely editable code without any proprietary components or constraints on the user interface. No vendor lock-in or IP dependency, especially important to independent software developers or companies who are trying to build apps that are core to their offering, where they're selling an app to the customer and that's their IP. You absolutely need IP ownership of the back-end server and the front end. And also the ability to leverage the fantastic development teams you may already have in-house. So most of our customers already have very competent developer teams and even mobile developers, but they just want to be able to do more with what they have. And that's what we give them with AnyPresence, as both the back-end as a service and the front-end development. And finally, the ability to deploy both in the cloud or on-premise or a combination thereof on a per-app basis, allowing you to scale the app based on the volume you're getting is key. And Michael mentioned the utility cost model, and that's what we've done with AnyPresence. We've created bundles of tiers essentially for apps. So you simply pay when you're ready to publish that app based on how well that app is doing. And once you're a customer of AnyPresence, you can build and test as many apps as you want. So again, just a quick overview and example of a backend as a service within an enterprise class solution that speaks to many of the advantages and challenges that Michael mentioned. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it back to Michael to wrap up.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rich. And if you pass it back to me, I will. Yep, there we go. I've got one more slide and one more set of topics to discuss, which is as you're looking at these mobile backend as a service platforms, what are the key differentiators? What are the things you should look for to differentiate one platform over another that I've seen? First is the biggest thing is from an enterprise, that enterprise integration platform. Both from a service perspective and a user perspective. And so a lot of times you'll see backend as a service providers say, we'll integrate with cloud data and we'll integrate with some of your enterprise data or more of your enterprise data. But the ones that do this well and the ones that really focus on the enterprise well will do both. We'll do all of your backend data and integrate in with your directory services for your user integration, such that you can have true role-based access to those services and to that data that you have. The next big differentiator that I see in this marketplace is the ability to do utility model deployments, which allow you to deploy both on-prem, in the cloud of your choosing, or the cloud that you might already have a relationship with, as well as being able to give one of these deployments to your developers or development teams, such that they can truly develop in the environment that's actually going to be deployed to. So if you've run development shops in the past, one of the common things you've heard is, well, it works on my machine, or it works in my environment. This allows you to really reduce the amount that you hear that excuse. And so if they can develop on the environment that it's going to be deployed in, and even then spin that environment down and spin it back up in the public location, that greatly reduces the amount of friction from the development to deploy that we see today. Providing integrated third-party access. We've talked about this before, but integrating these type of things, Twilio, SMS, email, etc., into the SDK that the provider gives you. That's key, and the number of these services and the number of the services that fit with what you're looking to do, both today and in the future, will determine, you know, a good backend as a service provider versus one that might not be a good fit. And finally, deeper tooling integration, both from a design and a development time perspective. So those that provide you not only with SDKs and not only with a platform, but also tooling around that platform. Now, you know, one of the benefits of this was that it allowed you to use tooling that you already had. So what I talk about here is plugins to Eclipse and plugins to your ALM systems and testing plugins and things like that. You know, allow these platforms to truly integrate into systems and platforms that you already have, such that they literally become like an extension of the system and of the model that you had going in. And so with that, I'll wrap it up and say, you know, thanks for being here, thanks for listening, and Rich, I believe we can open it up for questions.
Yep, thank you, Michael, and thanks again for those of you who stayed till the end. I know everyone has busy schedules, so we appreciate it. There's several questions that came in, some for Michael, some for me. One of the overall questions was, can we get the slides? And the answer is yes, of course. We will follow up with all the registrants and email them both the slides as well as a link to the replay, so you can share that around. Michael, first question for you. Do you believe the market will reach such heights as the reported $7.7 billion?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I've not been able to do a long-term analysis on the overall valuation of this market, but you know, we've got good numbers on the overall mobility market and good numbers on the cloud market, and that number seems to be a combination of both of those, kind of overlooking the overlaps there. So I actually don't believe it's going to hit that large, and definitely not in the near term. But I will say that this is a market. There's been a lot of activity on Twitter and some blogs and some articles asking whether or not this is a long-term viable market, and I absolutely believe it is, such that it will become as prevalent as the IaaS market and the PaaS market. You know, it'll be the IaaS, PaaS, and BaaS all together. Great,
thanks, Michael. A couple of other questions here. This one specific to AnyPresence. How about importing an existing app into AnyPresence? And this probably applies, you could apply this to probably any platform. You know, it's a very interesting question. What if you've already built a mobile app, maybe organically from the ground up, and you want to switch to a development platform? So, you know, I think in general, it's probably not going to be possible for platforms to reverse engineer what you've built and you know, back into their metadata. That said, I think the flexibility of solutions like AnyPresence and other MBaaS vendors allows you to do certain interesting things. So for example, we have a customer that built a native iOS application from the ground up and very quickly realized that adding features and functions to that app with native iOS was too much of a challenge for them to do organically. So they came to us and said, look, here's our roadmap of features. we actually want to migrate to HTML5 over time, but in the meantime, can you help us build these additional features in HTML5, which we then drop into our native application and make it more hybrid in the interim? And so we've done that. So you can develop an HTML5 app, or a feature of an app within AnyPresence, and because we generate pure non-proprietary code, that code can be given to a developer who then takes it and puts it in the existing native code base and wraps it to provide that additional piece of functionality as an addendum, if you will, to an existing app. Similarly, because we generate SDKs for all of the backend services, you can take an existing app and take these new libraries in and leverage backend services and other mobile services within an existing application. So I think there's many different ways to supplement perhaps an existing app that exists. Reverse engineering it and bringing it back into a platform is probably not feasible. Another question for AnyPresence is, what about the multiple OS versions? How does AnyPresence address this? Good question again. Fragmentation is certainly an issue. So we address it in two ways. We do support multiple OS versions for a specific OS. So for example, multiple versions of iOS or Android. When things have been deprecated in older versions, unless we have a customer that requests it, we no longer support it by default. On our website, we don't have it there today. It'll be there later in November. We'll have a full product or platform support matrix that talks about which features we support across all the different platforms that are out there today. On the front end side, we tend to stick with the lowest common denominator controls available in SDKs for these platforms. So if it's a brand new operating system that's been released with new SDK controls, we will commit to supporting it for our customers that ask for it. And if there's no one that asks for it, then it kind of gets deprioritized until we get to it. But generally speaking, our goal is to support at least 90% of the market coverage for each platform. So for Android, that means supporting, as you would imagine, several older versions back to, I think, 2.2 or something like that, to cover the broadest swath of the market that's using that particular mobile operating system. Let me see here, a few other questions. How important is mobility for hospitality in your opinion? We can probably both address that, Michael. I don't know if you want to take a quick stab at it from your perspective.
Yeah, sure. We're seeing mobility being extremely important across all verticals, and a lot of times the differentiator is it more of a B2C play, or is it a business to consumer play, or more of a business to employee? And in the hospital space, was it hospital or hospitality?
Hospitality, I beg your pardon.
And so in the hospitality space, a lot of what we're seeing is actually mobility driven to kind of point of sale users and enabling your employees to provide a better experience for the people that they are serving. So a lot of enterprise mobility to tablets to improve that experience. So judging the overall performance, most mobile applications are there to either increase revenue or decrease costs or enhance experiences. And so this is more the third scenario, but there definitely is an importance there.
Michael, a question that came in, which I'm going to let you address, given my bias. But how do you see vendor viability as part of the selection criteria for MBaaS?
Right, and that's probably the biggest question I get is this is a new space and a space that's very early in its maturity, and therefore most of the players in it are names that we've not heard from. The interesting thing is, while it's names that we've not heard from, it's a lot of players that we have, a lot of folks that are doing this have been in the enterprise space, at least the enterprise-focused ones have been in the enterprise space for some time, and therefore see this as a large business need and are creating this experience. And so vendor viability is obviously a huge concern. You don't want to get into a space or buy into a vendor and have that vendor go out of business 6 months later. but unfortunately at this point it's hard to really tell which ones will be there and which ones won't. So that's why I tend to look at things not from a which one is the cheapest, but I look at it from which one has the best technology platform, which one has the best feature function that matches up with my true business needs. A lot of times in the past, we in the enterprise space come at problems and say, who has the best technology, while we overlook the true business challenge that we have. We kind of get seduced by the technology. And in this case, I would be very clear as to the business challenge I have, who meets that the best, who can truly provide me a platform that can do that. And if that's the case, that means that vendor has probably spent some time in enterprise, understands the business challenges of enterprise if they meet your needs that well, and therefore I would have a lot more feeling of comfort with them. Now, the standard enterprise sales cycle still holds, such that a lot of these folks have already had wins, have already had success stories with other enterprises. So just because they have a name that you might not recognize today, other folks have already started to make use of them. And so I would say simply ask them where their successes have been, what type of success, what type of integrations, what type of apps have they put out there. Because a lot of folks, a lot of apps that you're using are already built on back-end as a service platforms that you simply might not be aware of.
Right. Good points, Michael. And it's of course people will take what I say with a grain of salt, and certainly I think the point about enterprise experience is important. Like folks at AnyPresence who've worked at SAP, Oracle, and Siebel Systems. But the other thing is nobody has a crystal ball. So we get asked this question all the time, and we simply say one thing. If we go out of business, we guarantee that you can take the runtime components and maintain and manage it on your own without any dependency on or relation to whether we exist or not. And I think that no lock-in really is critical to ask your MBaaS provider. So there's another question here. What about Windows 8 support? That's a good question. I'm assuming that's addressed to AnyPresence. We are starting to now see more interest from customers asking us about Windows 8 support. We've had it on our timeline, at least for our SDK perspective, in Q1 of next year, and have always felt that we'll be opportunistic and accelerate that if needed. We're watching very closely the launch of Surface and Windows RT. Personally, I do believe that Microsoft will gain traction. There's a whole horde of .NET developers out there salivating or chomping at the bit to build mobile apps on top of the Microsoft ecosystem. So from our perspective in AnyPresence, we believe we'll be supporting it at some point in the first half of next year based on demand. And I do think it's an interesting space to continue to watch. Let's see here. There's some follow-ups from the person who asked about evaluating vendor. I'll just read up a point of these. Look at the amount of money they've raised and profitability, and also look into source code escrow type of arrangement common to enterprise. And again, to the point about no vendor lock-in, we, as part of our platform, we actually generate and give you the source code. So, and there, I think, as you evaluate vendors, you should look at all of these different nuances of what no lock-in means, to address your particular level of comfort. Okay, and Michael, I think that's all the questions. Again, just as a reminder for everyone, we will be sending out links to the slides and the replay. Thank you very much for joining. Again, to those of you who stayed till the end, and look forward to hopefully catching you on another webinar soon. So thank you, Michael, again.
Thanks again. Thanks so much.